Good morning, everybody. My name is Del Stone, and I was invited to talk about what it was like growing up gay in the 1950s and 60s. I was born in late 1955, you might as well say 1956, here in the States, but my father was military, so we lived all over the world. What can I say about those times? Well, in 1955, the United States was about 10 years ahead of winning World War II, and the Korean War had just ended in a stalemate, and now we were deeply embedded in the Cold War, the whole duck and cover thing. You've probably seen those videos on YouTube. Well, I actually lived through some of that. I did not become aware of my feelings about other men until I was about, I would say, 4 years old. That is the earliest I can remember having any thoughts related to homosexuality. In fact, there was a specific incident that happened, I think it was 1959, maybe 1960. We were living in Biloxi, Mississippi, and Hurricane Ethel was threatening the area. The hurricane hit, and it blew down a pine tree in the backyard. We were living on the base at the time at Keesler Air Force Base. And the base commander had GIs out cleaning up the base in the aftermath of the storm, and they came by and they got rid of the tree. They dug it up. They didn't just cut it off at the ground. They dug it up. So there was a big crater in the backyard, and that was an ideal playground for young boys. So me and the young boy next door, he was a little bit younger than me, decided to make that into our fort. And we were out there playing in our fort, and this young man, whose name I have forgotten, suggested that I lie down in the hole and pretend that I was dead, and he would bury me, which I thought was a terrific idea. So I did. I lay down in the hole, and he started throwing dirt on top of me. Back then, nobody wore T-shirts. We were wearing button-down shirts, a pair of shorts, and this dirt falling all over me and down my shirt and down into my pants and, made its way down around my crotch. And I remember thinking at the time that this dirt had just been in his hands, and that the thought of that, this dirt that was touching my genitals, the thought of that actually stimulated me. And I felt like I had to submit to him. It was a very unusual reaction, I admit. And then Mom came outside and saw what was happening and put an end to that. I was yanked out of that hole and dragged inside and bathed and put in fresh clothes and told not to lie down in the crater and have the neighbor boy throw dirt on me. But then after that, I can remember numerous occasions where I felt attracted to males. It seems like every friend I made, we ended up at some point messing around with each other. Back then, of course, it was entirely innocent, just, exposing ourselves to one another. But as we got older, the things we did increased in sophistication. And I remember having lots of crushes on guys, not just guys I knew, other males that I encountered in my daily life, but movie actors. Billy Mooney on Lost in Space, he was a big crush of mine. And of course, the crush to end all crushes was Kurt Russell, which back in the 1960s, oh my gosh, Kurt Russell was on every TV show and in every movie, especially those Disney movies. Oh my gosh, to die for. And I wasn't particularly bothered by these attractions. I didn't take them very seriously. And I assumed that as I got older, I would outgrow them and become attracted to girls. And I felt free to continue indulging in playtime with my male friends, and life was grand. At the same time, I was slowly becoming aware that if I revealed any of this to anybody, especially my parents, the result would not be good. To be honest with you, I had never heard of the term homosexual. I didn't know anything about males who were attracted to other males. It was considered a forbidden topic. It was so forbidden that nobody ever talked about it. And you have to remember the times. This would be, from 1955 when I was born into about 65 through 67, 68. We were very innocent. We didn't have the body of knowledge that we have now. Obviously, we didn't have the technology we have now. There was no internet to provide us with a global perspective or to give us access to information from all over the world. There was no sex education, despite what may have been discussed in the national media or in school districts in other parts of the country. I never had a sex education class. The closest we ever came to sex education was a film that we were shown in the 9th grade. All the boys of the school were hustled into the auditorium, and they showed us a film, and this film made vague references to what might happen to us at night. We might have dreams and something might happen, and oh my gosh, it was all very mysterious, and we kind of thought maybe it had something to do with sex, but we weren't sure. Nobody had ever explained the mechanics of how it all worked. We basically ended up educating ourselves by talking to one another. Our parents sure as heck didn't give us any education. So that's the way it went. And as I got older and began to learn more about the world and began to understand that, these feelings I was having were absolutely forbidden, I became more reluctant to reveal my feelings to anybody or to mess around with my friends. I think that the last time that happened, I was about 14 years old. When I entered my late teens and my 20s, it was not an option. By then, it was okay to talk about homosexuality because we were older and it was scorned. The church scorned it. The military scorned it. My family scorned it. The American Psychiatric Association described it as a mental illness. I mean, by then I began to understand the implications of people finding out that I was gay. I could possibly lose my job. My family might disown me. I could be harassed. I could be beaten. I could be killed. And obviously those are very important considerations. So I did what a lot of guys did back then. I hid. And I have to tell you, I regret that now. I wish to God I had not done that. In fact, there were a lot of guys back then who basically said to hell with the world and pursued their feelings and met other guys and had long-term relationships. And you see them now on places like Facebook where there are groups dedicated to, elderly gay folks. They've been together for 30, 40, 50 years. And I wish I had done that. I wish that I had had the courage to say to hell with the world. I'm attracted to men and I'm going to find me a guy and live happily ever after. But I didn't do it. I was still convinced that if I met the right girl, my feelings would change. this flirtation with homosexuality would go away, that I would become a raging heterosexual, have a hockey team full of children, and live happily ever after. And I met a girl who fit the bill. She was beautiful, she was smart, she was hardworking. She was the perfect girl. She would have made a perfect wife. And I loved her, but when it came time to have sex, it just wasn't going to happen. It wasn't going to happen. And we stayed together for about 2.5 years, and finally she just said, I've got to find someone who can give me a complete relationship, and off she went. And I continued on this path of trying to find a girl until my late 20s, early 30s, and then I began to realize that, this is not going to work. Luckily for me, attitudes were beginning to change. And it wasn't until, I think, the early 1990s, the first instance I remember of seeing a gay character on television was in episodes of that MTV reality series, The Real World. And then afterwards came Ellen DeGeneres and, some of the other shows, Will and Grace, that sort of opened the door. But until then, it was still somewhat forbidden, and there were still serious consequences. But I finally began to realize that, this was not going to change, that this was not a phase, that this was not going to change. And finally, in my late 30s, I just said, to hell with it. I guess I'm gay. And unfortunately, by then, I had sort of passed my prime, and it was tough to find partners. Gosh, if I thought it was tough then, little did I know. And I'm sorry to say this, but I have never had an honest-to-God gay relationship. I have had short-term relationships with guys, and I have had sexual encounters with guys, but not an actual honest-to-God relationship. There was a guy I met in the 90s who I fell head over heels in love with. I was madly in love with him, and I thought he was gay. And we had a conversation one night, and he revealed that he was not, that he was straight. And to be honest with you, I didn't believe him. I thought he was one of these guys who just could not admit that he was gay, and maybe if I just hung around long enough, I could be there when he finally realized that, yes, in fact, he was gay. I mean, I'd gone through the same experience myself. So I hung around, and it did not work out, and I didn't handle that situation very well. And after almost 3 years of us being friends, we stopped. I had to escape because it was killing me. I could not stand to be around him and not have access to him. So I cut the ties, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done. I was sad for the next 2 or 3 years. I had to seek counseling, and to this day, it kind of bothers me. But I don't know. They say you should never have any regrets in life, but I do. I wish I could go back, and I think you see these postings on social media about advice that you could give your younger self, 3 words of advice you could give your younger self. And my advice to my younger self would be, take more risks. Happiness is a risk, and I wish to God I had risked happiness.